Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and inspired by a game played earlier today in the Group A event, or the Group A tournament at Vik on Zee, I thought I would show a game that illustrates, let's say, that the sometimes rumored draw death that's approaching in chess is really further away than we might think. So the game that I'm referring to that was played today was between Nepomniachtchi and Alexei Shirov, and it was in the Tkachyev variation, or the Neo-Archangelsk variation of the Ruy Lopez. In I think it was round one, Shirov played this variation against Jan Smeets and lost very badly. I and other commentators had noted that Black did have one resource, although it still looked like Black's position was kind of tough. And sure enough, Shirov repeated that same variation today, made the improvement, and although the game was a long one in terms of moves, it's something like 79 moves, the game was actually finished while other games were still hadn't even made its move 20 yet. In fact, they had made their first 40 moves, both players, in less than 45 minutes. I mean, it was really ridiculous. They reached this ending with Smeets having a queen and I think one pawn against queen and two pawns against a rook, knight, and pawn, and it was just a fortress. I mean, more or less, Shirov drew a 79 move game basically at home with his preparation. So things like that are just both awesome in the sense of being impressive and remarkable and all of those sorts of things, but also kind of terrifying in the terrible sense that is this what chess has come to, where 40 plus moves are just prepared flat out at home. I mean, this makes it seem as if playing chess is just impossible, that either we should all play chess 960, or at least that amateurs should look for sidelines, things like this, just kind of opt out of this crazy theoretical rat race. Well, there are occasional lines like that, but I want to show, or I at least hope to show today, that it's really not quite that bad. I mean, there are some lines like that, but even in the lines that are like that, chess isn't quite as dead as you might fear. So what I want to show is a bit of an evolution of a variation, and this too involves Shirov, and a similarly impressive bit of home prep, but to show that home prep really wasn't the end of the story. Okay, well, let's begin. And our story begins with the Botvinnik system in the Queen's Gambit Declined, one of Shirov's favorites. In fact, he still plays this from time to time. Okay, now the last word isn't going to be Shirov's, but anyway, thousands and thousands of games have gone down this path. And while the variation looks absolutely insane, and it is absolutely insane, I think, I'm not going to stop and explain what's going on here, or this would be a 3-hour show. Okay, so I'll mention some deviations along the way from this point. So there are two main moves here. There's knight to a4, and there's rook to b1, which is what we're going to look at. So white is happy to sacrifice the knight, and just to briefly show the idea, okay, if b takes c3, then b takes c3 back, let's say queen a6, rook takes b7, queen b7, and d takes e6. And with all of these open lines, white has full compensation. In fact, compensation is not even the right word, because if he plays e takes d7 or e7 next after the queen moves, he isn't even down any material. So this is just horrible. Black cannot play b takes c3, at least not if he cares about the result of the game. Okay, so queen a6 is played here, getting out of the way first. D takes e6, bishop takes g2, and now you don't take the bishop back, you don't take the knight, and you don't save your knight on c3, you play e7. Okay, and now black doesn't move the rook, but plays bishop f1. Now here, white can also play king takes f1, but we're going to look at queen to d5. All right, nowadays I suppose the theoretical last word is to play bishop takes e7 here, and this has been known for a long time too. Actually, there's a 1996 game that might be might still be the last word, or one of the last words. Okay, now here, rook d to g8 is not considered very good, but bishop to d3 is thought to be right. And now knight to e4. Bishop takes b1, knight to d6, king c7, bishop f4, king b6. And as far as I know, and this still seems to be the case, white has nothing better than perpetual, and this seems to be the end of the line. Yeah, so Topalov made a bishop here in a game with Kramnik that was agreed drawn here back in Dortmund in 1996. So, excuse me, this bishop takes e7 move is, I think, the reason why king takes f1 is now, pardon me, the hotter move in this position. All right, but we're going to look at bishop to h6, which was also thought to be just a draw for a number of years, also because of a 1996 game. Okay, now here white can take the rook and promote, but that's considered second best. I think it's supposed to be equal. So bishop takes h6, bishop to d3, and now, okay, ed, this is supposed to be fine. Knight to e4 might be interesting. This might be a reasonable try for white. So this position is of some interest, perhaps. But the main move, what we're going to focus on, is queen to a8 check. And the next batch of moves are more or less forced, or pretty close to forced. So knight to b8 is forced. Okay, finally white cashes in with the pawn. Rook to e1. Okay, and now maybe black's last chance to get off the train before it goes off the cliff is queen c6. Although I'm not sure if this does. I think it just needs to be examined more deeply. It's certain, I think, that white is better in this position. Up a pawn. Okay, being up a pawn in the Botvinnik system doesn't mean very much because both sides have these monster majorities on opposite sides of the board, and the only question that really matters is how effective those majorities are. So I'm not sure how much better white is here, but I think white has a meaningful advantage here. So b takes c3 is the classical move here, and certainly the one that's been played the most. Okay, bishop f4, threatening to take the knight. And now queen to b7 is a blunder because of, see if you can find it. Quick moment of tactics practice here for you. Rook e7. So that just wins the game on the spot. So the point, if you don't see, is queen takes a8, rook c7 is checkmate. Okay, so queen to b6 is the correct move. Okay, now white takes. Now bishop to f5. And here we go back to some older games. All right, h4, trying to get the kingside pawns rolling, was the move that was played back in the 90s, and certainly makes a lot of sense. There's a game that was played between Yermolinsky and Dmitry Gurevich, I think probably from a U.S. championship in 1994. Actually, I'm not sure if that's what the event was, but anyway, it was played in the United States in 1994. Gurevich played bishop to e6, and without getting into a lot of details and looking at every move, we got to here, and then sometime later, we reached this position. And now white played queen to d5. And the key is how this endgame works. So takes, king e8, king g3. And this ending is probably just winning for white, or at least it's very, very difficult for black. The problem, of course, is the white kingside majority, and more to the point that the black bishop really doesn't get to play any part in restraining it. So the game ended like this. Rook h6, rook to d6, bishop e6, f4. And if he takes, then f5 is going to win material. Maybe even g5 is good, cutting the rook off and then just promoting or pushing the h-pawn. So that might be even better. So Gurevich went back to h8, king h4, bishop to d7, f5, king d8. I mean, he's really got to go through these long-winded procedures to try to get his bishop into play. Rook a6, rook e8, rook a7, and now the h-pawn runs. Well, okay. didn't even need a run, so he just cleaned up the queen side. The black rook is stuck holding on to or keeping an eye on the h pawn. A rook trade would be instantly hopeless for black, even if white didn't have all these queenside passers, because he just moves the king out of the way and then starts pushing the g pawn. So this is the basic problem for black in this ending. Okay, so going back to this position, bishop to e6 was played by Gurevich. Shirov, in a game against Asmay Parashvili back in '96, let me see what tournament that was from Madrid, found a way for black to defend. So here's what he came up with. Queen to b7. Okay, well, white's got a trade. Because, yeah, rook to e7 doesn't work here. Rook to e7 would be a blunder because of rook to d1 check. And in fact, not only could black just take the queen next move, even better, he gives mate on h1. So rook e7 clearly needs to be avoided. So they traded queens, then rook e7, bishop takes b8, and then this got liquidated as well. So this ending obviously is going to come down to whether black can stop white's huge kingside majority. Black can't do anything on the queen side. White's pawns are safe there, and he has no majority. Well, it doesn't have a useful majority. So again, it's just whether white wins or draws. All right, well, black is threatening just to bring his king over and win the f-pawn. So up comes white's king. And now the key move of the game. Bishop to c6. All right, the point of this is, well, we'll see it in the game. If h5 here, then king e6, and then bishop to f3. Okay, this is key, or in the game we'll see the same point. King g5, bishop f3. And Shirov says about bishop to c6 the following. He says, you have to find such moves at home if you play the Botvinnik variation. If white can get his king to g5 and pawn to f4, then black can only resign. And the reason is that in that position, white can cut off both bishop diagonals. So he's going to play g4, h5, and then, of course, if he could, he'd play h6 and h7. So once all that happens, black plays bishop to e4. And if this guy can get to f5, he wins. We might say, well, what's the big deal? Just play f4 after you've driven the bishop back, and then f5. Well, the problem is that black will play bishop to h7 first, and white won't be able to make any further progress. So we'll see. King f5, king d5, g4 here, h5. So he just waits, and they repeated the position and agree to a draw here. Shirov writes this. He says, as the reader will have realized, the final position, this is move 42 by the way, the final position had been analyzed at home. And then he drolly says, sometimes the Botvinnik variation gets so boring. Okay, well, before we discuss how boring this really is or isn't, let me again make illustrate this point. So h6, bishop to e4 is of course forced, f4, bishop h7. And black can afford to play like this only once white has played h6. Otherwise, king h6, and white makes further progress. But here, there's no way to make more progress. In fact, okay, it's probably, well, I don't know. Might even have to make sure that white doesn't get into trouble here. He may just get zugzwanged out of all of his pawns. So this may not even be worth trying for white. I mean, it may just be that he gets in trouble here. But certainly black is in no trouble at this point. White can make no more progress, and black might be able to. Okay, so this was a brilliant bit of preparation by Shirov, and everyone believed it for 9 years. So it's a nice idea, very well analyzed, all around praiseworthy, but not the end of the story. So, fast forward to 2005, the Dutch Championship. Van Wely, who, although this game that he's playing here, as I said, is the Dutch Championship, he played against Jan Smeets. So there comes Smeets again. We have this little circle. Van Wely has often kind of had these principled battles against people like Shirov and Radjabov, where normally it's them going head to head with Shirov and some Najdorf Sicilians, with Radjabov in the classical King's Indian, and but here we have kind of a war by proxy in the Botvinnik system with Shirov. So Van Wely, of course, recognized the key point, which is that for black to hold in an endgame, which can arise, I mean, it's not, there's still plenty of pieces here, but we've seen that this ending arises, and arises fairly naturally if white wants it. The key aspect for white, from white's point of view, is to prevent black's bishop from being able to defend on these diagonals. So Van Wely came up with a great move here. Simply played f2 to f3. And this illustrates, well, first of all, we can see how it would work in the previous variations that we saw, how it would have been great for white to have this in the Shirov-Asmay-Parashvili game, or I should say Asmay-Parashvili-Shirov game. Secondly, it's just useful in general, and it turns out that there's really not a lot that black can do positively. So black is kind of waiting around for white to resolve this tension around the black king. And it looks as if f3 is basically a refutation of this line, although again, we should be careful, so we shouldn't jump to the other thing. It's not just that Shirov thought he had buried this variation as a draw and turned out to be wrong. Well, maybe there's going to be some brilliant defense for black that keeps the ball rolling here. But so far, it's not looking so good. Okay, first thing we should say is that queen to b7 is not so great, because white will play not rook to e7. Again, this loses to rook to d1 check, and then queen takes queen. Rook to c7 isn't mate if the black king has the d8 square. But instead, white trades, plays g4, rook e7 check, and now let's say h4. And it turns out that the bishop maybe doesn't really want to be there, but in any case, black is going to have serious problems with this f7 pawn, and if that drops, it's hopeless. So this position is in fact hopeless, because if rook to f8, well, still h5, and then you can take the knight and then take the pawn. And rook to d7 doesn't work. In fact, it just loses to bishop takes b8. Okay, so queen to b7 is no good. All right, another idea, another idea is bishop to d7. And this was tried in an email game. So I noticed that after this game, no one has dared to try this for black over the board, but some people have tried to do it in correspondence, and they're 0 for it. White has won every game. And perhaps it's worth saying a word about correspondence play, which is that sometimes, even with pretty good players, I think they rely too much on their computers. So for in the USCF, you're not allowed to use your computers, although of course many players do anyway, but you're not allowed to use it. But in the ICCF, the International Correspondence Chess Federation, they've given up the ship. Since most people just use them anyway, or many people use them anyway, they've just made it a free-for-all. And of course, this is very helpful for a player, but it can also be dangerous. If you don't understand what's going on, you may not realize that it's the kind of position where the evaluation is clear and the proof of it is inevitable, even if it's outside of the horizon of a chess engine. And that's exactly what you have here. I mean, the computer even now thinks that black is doing just fine. Thank you very much. It's about equal. But really, if black has no way of coping with these pawns as they slowly run up the board, then he's just dead. And that's what's happened in all these email games, even with players with pretty respectable ratings. Okay, so let's have a look. So bishop to d7 instead of queen to b7. So this is a game Valenis against Bukur. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing their names properly at all. In an email game in 2008. So it went rook to d1, queen b7, takes, rook b1 check, king a8. So he's tying black down as much as possible. And now g4. Okay. This actually is one of the better games, I think, from black's point of view, because he at least has a logical idea in mind. So he plays bishop to a4, again, trying to get the bishop on one of the key defensive diagonals. But white is able to use the other point that we mentioned before, which was the weakness of the pawn on f7. It's very easy for black to defend that pawn with his bishop on e6, but if his bishop's stuck on e6, it can't get to the defensive diagonals once the h-pawn starts running up the board. So it's a dilemma for black. Rook to b6, g5, bishop c2. So again, black's play is all making very good sense. So he forces the pawn to g5, so he has access to the f5 square. Okay, rook e7, f4, and now just f5. And in fact, black is basically in a kind of a zugzwang here almost. But even if he's not, I mean, white can just play the king up to g4 and then start pushing his pawns. So there's really no fortress at this point for black. And of course, once the king gets to g4 and h5 happens, then there are problems with this as well as everything else. All right, so black tried rook to b8, and now f5. And white just advances. And this is kind of cute. I mean, you probably shouldn't make that sacrifice over the board, but in correspondence it's very easy to confirm, especially with the help of a computer, that this works. And black resigned here. Of course, he's up a rook and a bishop, but the four pawns together cannot be stopped, and black has no counterplay. All right, so bishop to d7 made some sense, but didn't work. So let's get back to the Van Willy-Smeets position. Black played bishop to e6 there, not necessarily recognizing what was happening. g4, bishop to d5, and now here come the swaps. Okay, the rooks stay on the board, but the key thing is that black's bishop is in no shape whatsoever to deal with the pawns. It's on the wrong side. King c7, h4. Okay, so yeah, when I first saw this game back in 2005, I checked it with the computer just to see what it thought. And first, it thinks that black is clearly better. Then it runs a little bit more and says slightly better. And then it says equal. Okay, and now my contemporary computer. Actually, my older computer, so a couple years old, says first equal, and then slightly better for white. But it doesn't get to a catastrophic fail evaluation for black yet. But it gets there a few moves later, but not so quickly. All right, so here we have some deviations. The move that or an alternative that I looked at the time, and which has been played since in a number of games, is king to d6. I should say, okay, Smeets played rook to d6, which we'll come back to. So king to d6, and again, now white just builds. The problem for black is, it's funny. We're talking about black's bishop needing to get to the right diagonal, so you might think, well, it's just a matter of time. If he really hurries, maybe he can get there. But the key thing is that the white pawn is on f3, and given that that's there, it turns out that it's just basically hopeless. So white can just build at his leisure here. He can penetrate on the e-file when he's good and ready, advance the king, push the pawns just right, and it's over. All right, so king to g3, and now several games continue with rook to h8. Okay, white played f4. In one game, black just resigned here. So this was Marcus Rager against Hausler in 2006. Black just gave up. Okay, in two other games, black continued, but to no avail. Okay, in one of them, black played a5. This is Van den Croisse against Eschweiss, and it was an email game in 2007. So white played f5, then h5, rook e7, and here black blundered with bishop to e4, but it wouldn't have mattered. So there's nothing for him to do. I mean, white's going to push, play g5, g6, and win. He may even be able to play the rook sack just for fun if he wants, though it's not something he should do. Okay, so a5 just is more or less giving up. It does nothing. Okay, in another game, this is D'Souza against Ahmed, another ICCF email game in 2006. White won very quickly with f5, rook e7, h5, and now rook e2 is a nice final move. Not necessary, but nice. The idea is to set up with the king on f4, the rook goes to h2, and then h6, g5, g6, and so on. Okay, so that didn't do anything. All right, rook to b8 was, I think, the line that I came up with back in 05. Maybe this was more recent, but yeah, this was analysis. And again, we see the same ideas at work. So we just build up. Okay, let's say bishop to d7, rook e7, rook h7. Okay, if rook to f8, then king g5, and then g5 and g6 is coming. And if rook h7, then we can even make this sacrifice. Yeah, actually this is new analysis, but it's all good. Okay, so king f6, king h5, h7, and that wins. So there's just nothing for black to do. And again, it's remarkable, but it's a chronic problem. Once that pawn's on f3, black just cannot combat this white advance. All right, back to the game position here with h4. So as I said, king to d6 is what we just looked at. Rook to d6 is what Smates played. One more try was rook to h8. This was played in a game, a 2005, again, ICCF email game, Lindstrom against Nylander, and it went like this. King d3, king g3, f4, h5. I think we've seen these ideas before. Okay, I might have played a3 just to tidy things up, but it doesn't matter. And rook e3. And again, the idea is to bring the rook over to h3 and then play g6. Black has no good defense to this plan. Well, actually, yeah, no, here you don't have to do that, because here if you play rook h3, then king e5. So king h5 would be the biggest point here. And so rook e3 covers f3 against the bishop check. So king h5 and then g6. That's the plan. All right, so let's see now how Smates lost. Rook to d6. Rook e7 check, and here Smates blunders and loses instantly. He plays rook to d7, and now after h5 the pawn just queens. So there's not even a bad way for black to proceed. King d6, we just trade. Let me enter this. King d6 just takes h6, and the black king can't get there in time. And thanks to this beautiful pawn on f3 and also this beautiful pawn on g4. There's no bishop e6, f5, or just bishop to e4. Of course, the bishop e6, f5 idea would have been back here. So nothing to be done. The pawn just promotes. Instead of rook to d7, though, black could have played king to b6. But again, the fundamental problem is always there. g5, rook to d8, f4, and we just creep forward. Okay, if rook to h8, then even g6 is pretty strong. King c6, h5, and yeah, we can even do a little cleaning up here. Okay, I'm sure I can find a smoother variation, but this is more than good enough as well. And here, well, you could even play king to g3 here, because if rook h1, then king g2. Okay, so there's no defense here for black. All right, so this is, I think, a very interesting endgame. Certainly an incredibly interesting variation. This whole Botvinnik Semi-Slav complex is just amazing in its complexity. But I think it's also a salutary lesson in two ways. So one is that it shows the power of deep preparation, but it also shows that even this extremely deep preparation doesn't necessarily end the story. So as impressive as Shirov's preparation was against Asmey-Parashvili, Van Wely was able to find a hole in the idea, or a way of, not so much a hole in the idea, but a way of thwarting that defensive plan. And this goes on in chess all the time. So think about lines in that way too. There's a certain fundamental problem. Okay, so in the original game, in the Yermolinsky-Gurevich game, the problem that black had later on after the exchange took place was getting his bishop into an ideal defensive location. Shirov very cleverly found a way to achieve that, to get the bishop where it needed to be. And then Van Wely realized by going back a move, he could set it up so that that bishop couldn't get there. So in general, when you're thinking about opening variations, it's not really about memorizing a string of otherwise unintelligible moves. Rather, it's that there's some key problem or set of problems in the position that need to be solved, and theory, certainly at the grandmaster level, is about finding ways of dealing with these plans, of creating new plans if old ones are thwarted, and of course of thwarting the ones that are currently present. All right, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.